In this section, we're going to learn about what scientists refer to as different states of brain operation. We're going to learn about brain waves and speeds and talk about how feedback loops and patterns are created. Then we'll go over how the brain processes pleasure and pain, how addiction can start, and why we can be so negative at times. So, since we've got a lot to cover, let's get to it. So estimates vary, but neuroscientists agree that somewhere between 85 to 95% of our brain activity is beyond conscious awareness. That's a lot. We sort of understand what the conscious brain state does. This is our alert and paying attention state. Some people refer to this as the mind, but it's only 5 to 15% of our entire brain operation. The rest is what I'll call non-conscious, which includes the subconscious and the unconscious states. The primary purpose of these non-conscious states of the brain is for long-term storage of repeated, uninterrupted patterns that have become automatic and self-perpetuating feedback loops. I'm going to say that again because it's pretty important. The primary purpose of the non-conscious brain states is for the long-term storage of repeated, uninterrupted patterns that have become automatic and self-perpetuating feedback loops. So let's break it down. In general, our brains are thought to operate consciously, subconsciously, and unconsciously. Think of the differences as being defined by how easy they are to get to. The shape of an iceberg is used frequently to describe this. The conscious mind, or the tip of the iceberg, is the smallest part, but it's the one we can access most easily. The subconscious and the unconscious brain, the two larger parts, are below the surface, so to speak. They are not as easy to get to, and they operate more automatically, often without notice. The subconscious mind operates just below the surface, like what did you eat for breakfast or what's today's date? You're not thinking about those things throughout the day, but with awareness and some intentional reflection, we can bring those facts and details up into our conscious mind pretty easily. The unconscious operational state is for longer-term memory storage, automatic body operations, and can be where some memories are repressed. Memories that are stored deeply in the unconscious mind can be much more difficult to access directly. Another way I comprehend levels of consciousness is by using the analogy of states of water. Water can be solid, like an ice cube, or liquid, like fluid, or gaseous, like steam or even vapor at its most non-formed level. But it's still all water. So imagine all those states existing and interacting in one glass. This is how I conceptualize levels of consciousness. To hold the form of ice together, I imagine that this state takes a lot more effort or energy compared to the more fluid or steam forms of water. Similarly, the conscious mind takes more energy and focus to hold together so we can use it. However, sometimes conscious effort is worth it because similar to the more solid form of ice, when we're operating in our more solid form conscious state, we can use this operational state of our brains more intentionally, like a tool and for a purpose. So why is our brain set up this way? In part, it's because there is so much processing going on in our brains at any given time that if we were consciously aware of all of it all the time, we probably wouldn't be able to function. It'd be too overwhelming. At any given moment, you may be looking at the screen and listening to my voice, but your brain is picking up on so much more. Sounds in the background, the temperature of the room, the body position and comfort, what's going on in other rooms, or if you have family running around. So it keeps the most immediately relevant subjects, like right now, this class, in the conscious level of your brain. Plus, as I already mentioned, anything that goes on in our conscious mind takes a lot more energy. So, in order to keep our body functioning routinely, while still leaving energy for us to perform tasks like learning and creating, much of the brain operates in a sort of subconscious autopilot. This organization is very energy efficient. Once a new behavior, thought, or experience becomes habitual, it takes up far less brain energy to just keep it quietly and repeatedly running, subconsciously or unconsciously, in our brain's background. Let's take walking as example. After the age of 2 or 3, our brains don't have to process all the complex movements that are needed to take every forward step in order to walk. I mean, do you ever think about the process of walking anymore? Or what about your drive to work or around town each day? Have you ever arrived at your destination and barely remember the drive or commute to get there? How does our subconscious brain do this? In part by putting together pieces of what we take in and anticipating a pattern based on a past pattern that is already stored in unconscious memory. And sometimes our brains even try to fill in the gaps with random information in order to complete a loop of information. No lie. There are times when our brain is basically guessing. And it's doing so because completing a feedback loop, whether it's right or wrong, and predicting our response is important to efficiency. And the brain is always aiming for energy efficiency. I'm going to put this up and let you read it again and let it really sink in. The subconscious brain creates automated loops by putting together pieces of what we perceive and anticipating a pattern based on a past pattern that is stored for reference in the unconscious mind. And sometimes it even fills in the gap in order to complete a loop of meaning. And that meaning then directs our behavior choice. Wow. So what this tells us is that most of the choices and behavior that we believe we're making by our conscious will in any given moment are actually being made from pre-established memories that are stored unconsciously in our brains. In fact, let me tell you about this study they did in 2019 in Australia. In this study, researchers were able to monitor human brain activity with functional MRI, and they were able to predict participants' choices 7 to 11 seconds before they actually made their choice. What? I mean, in other words, they could tell by looking in their brains what choice they were going to make before the person consciously made the choice. That's totally wild. So what this study suggests is that traces of our previous thoughts continue to exist unconsciously, kind of like a neurochemical residue, I imagine. So as we're about to make our next choice, part of our brain looks for and chooses the thought trace which is strongest or has been repeated the most often. In other words, if there's any pre-existing brain activity or memory about a previous experience, one that even closely resembles one of your current choices, your brain will be more likely to pick the same behavior or choice for the current situation as it did for the last one. Why? Because it's energy efficient. We're going to talk more about this in a minute, but let's do a quick fun example so you can experience this for yourself. Now, close your eyes for a moment, or you can keep them open if you want to, but I want you to imagine walking to the kitchen and picking up a lemon. Now, imagine rolling it on the counter a bit like you do to kind of get fruit softened, and then open up the drawer, and I want you to visualize getting a knife, and then I want you to slice open that lemon and watch the juice glisten and rise to the surface. Now pick up the lemon and lick it. Did you notice any salivation starting at the base of your tongue? If you did, your brain in that few short seconds referenced your unconscious memory to see whether you had any previous lemon eating experiences, and then predicting the same pattern of response, it set off the activation of saliva for the anticipated lemon lick. Why? Because we have enough of a pattern established with salivation in response to sour lemons that the brain chooses the most energy efficient response and predictably starts salivating in advance. Now, have you ever seen a kid taste a lemon for the very first time? It's highly different and conflicting to their brains, especially that very first time they taste it. And that first time took a lot of brain energy to manage. So now, as an adult, our brain tries to avoid or minimize the discomfort of that sour taste through advanced salivation. So why do we have a body response just from imagination? Because you have enough of a pattern that says that what you think about, you'll act on. In other words, you have a pattern that says that if you're thinking about a lemon, most likely you're about to eat a lemon. This is also why some of those pizza or cheeseburger commercials are so effective. They can elicit a conditioned behavior response pattern simply based on an image, especially if you have a long-standing repeated unconscious memory of some really good burger or pizza eating, right? So by learning this, can you start to see why it's so important to notice and redirect unwanted thoughts? They can initiate unwanted responses and behaviors almost automatically, unless you intentionally and consciously intervene. Play around with that a bit later. Imagine some future pleasant situation similar to one you've experienced before in your mind, and see what kind of body response you get as you imagine it. But be careful. This feature of the brain is why people can get addicted to fantasy, because it elicits similar responses to the real thing, but without any potential conflict or pushback from another live human. The real problem lies in the fact that your brain is doing this automatically all the time, even when we're not aware of it. Okay, so let's review. The brain state that we're aware of and that only represents about 5 to 15% of our brain's functioning is the conscious brain. The subconscious brain is great for quick recall of facts and recent memory. Habits or conditioned responses are created because the brain likes to be energy efficient. Much of the unconscious brain is used for long-term storage of repeated, uninterrupted patterns that have become automatic and self-perpetuating feedback loops. This is helpful for general body operation, but can be unhelpful with undesired thought patterns. The subconscious brain refers back to traces of previous thoughts or memories stored in the unconscious brain. That way, it can try to predict an outcome and direct us to make the same choice as it did before, which is much more energy efficient. You got it. See you in the next video.